The tranquil scent of jasmine in my mother's garden was a fragile piece, easily shattered. But when a routine neighborhood dispute turned violent, they didn't just unleash a dog, they unleashed me. The scent of petunias and damp earth always smelled like peace to me. It was the smell of home, the smell of my mother. Mama B was 82 years old, but her hands, though wrinkled and dotted with age spots, were still strong and sure as they worked the soil of her small front garden. She hummed a low gospel tune, a sound that had been the soundtrack to my entire life, a constant melody played against the chaotic static of my own profession. I sat on the porch steps, sipping lukewarm coffee, content to just watch her. For me, these moments were everything. They were the reason I endured the long, silent months away, the dust and the danger, the things I could never, ever tell her about. My world was one of sterile briefing rooms, the metallic taste of adrenaline and the weight of specialized gear. Her world was this patch of green in a quiet suburban neighborhood, her greatest conflicts being the aphids on her prize-winning roses or the squirrels stealing from her bird feeder. I fought to keep it that way. I'd spent 2 decades becoming a ghost, a weapon honed in the harshest environments on the planet, all so that she could have this, so she could hum her hymns and worry about nothing more than the threat of an early frost. I saw the patrol car before I heard it. It's a reflex, a deeply ingrained habit. You learn to clock every vehicle, every pedestrian, every subtle change in the rhythm of a street. It rolled to a stop 2 houses down. Normal enough. But then a second car appeared, pulling up directly in front of our lawn. My back straightened instantly. My coffee cup was placed silently on the concrete beside me. My posture shifted from relaxed daughter to something else. My senses sharpened, the pleasant blur of the afternoon resolving into high-definition clarity. The squeak of the car door, the crunch of gravel under heavy boots, the slight jingle of equipment on a duty belt. 2 officers got out. One was young, face still fresh with the academy's optimism, his hand hovering nervously near his sidearm. The other was older, thicker around the middle, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun too long. He was the one in charge. "Ma'am," the older one called out, his voice a gravelly bark that cut right through Mama B's humming. She didn't hear him at first. She was leaning over, intently focused on a stubborn patch of crabgrass. Her hearing wasn't what it used to be, especially when she was in her garden zone. "Ma'am," he shouted again, louder this time, taking a step onto the walkway. The younger one flanked him, his eyes wide, scanning everything from the porch swing to the roof line. I stood up slowly, deliberately keeping my hands open and visible at my sides. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, my voice calm and even. The voice I used for de-escalation. The voice that said, "I am not a threat. Let's solve this problem together." The older cop, whose name tag read Miller, ignored me. His focus was entirely on the small, stooped figure of my mother. "I need you to stand up and show me your hands." "Now." Mama B finally heard him. She straightened up, a little unsteadily, a look of pure confusion on her face. She held up her hands, one of which was still clutching her favorite little gardening trowel, caked with fresh dirt. "Officer, is something the matter?" she asked, her voice frail but clear. That's when the third vehicle arrived, a black and white SUV, the K9 unit. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. This was escalating far too quickly. This was wrong. My training was screaming at me, running threat assessments, calculating angles, identifying exits. But my heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror for my mother. "Drop the weapon," the young officer yelled, his voice cracking. He actually drew his pistol. "Weapon," I said, taking a half-step forward. "That's a gardening trowel." "Officer, my mother is 82 years old. She's a little hard of hearing. What is this about?" Miller finally turned his gaze to me. His eyes were cold, flat. "We have a report of a suspect matching her description involved in an armed robbery a few blocks over. Black female, elderly, armed with a knife." The absurdity of it was staggering. Mama B hadn't been more than a mile from this house in 3 years. Her idea of a weapon was a sternly worded letter to the editor. But there was no reasoning in his eyes, only suspicion. The K9 officer was getting out now, a lean, wiry man with a face as tense as the Belgian Malinois, straining at the leash beside him. The dog was a sleek, muscular shadow of pure kinetic energy, its focus locked entirely on my mother. "Put the trowel down, Mama," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, though the ice in my stomach was now a glacier. "Just put it on the ground, nice and slow." Confused and scared, she did as I said. The little metal tool clinked softly on the stone path. She raised her empty, trembling hands. It should have ended there. It should have been the moment they realized their catastrophic mistake. But it wasn't. Miller took another aggressive step forward. On your knees. Hands behind your head. Now. My mother's old knees wouldn't bend that fast. She wavered, trying to comply, but her balance was off. She took a small, stumbling step to steady herself. That's all it took. To them, it wasn't an old woman trying not to fall. It was non-compliance. It was a threat. Unit is non-compliant, Miller barked into his shoulder mic. He nodded at the K9 handler. Light her up. The handler's command was sharp, guttural. Apprehend. The leash went slack. The world seemed to slow down, every detail magnified. I saw the handler's smirk. I saw the blur of black and tan fur launching across the lawn, a missile of teeth and fury. I saw my mother's eyes widen in sheer, uncomprehending terror. And then I heard a sound that ripped through the very fabric of my world and tore a hole in my soul. Her scream. It was a thin, panicked shriek as the dog hit her, 82 pounds of trained aggression slamming into 110 pounds of brittle bone and wrinkled skin. She went down hard, the dog on top of her, its jaws snapping, the sound lost in her cries of pain. For a single, frozen nanosecond, I was just a daughter, watching a nightmare unfold. My heart shattered into a million pieces. Then, the training took over. The 2 decades of conditioning, of turning emotion into fuel, of viewing the world as a series of targets and objectives. The daughter who baked cookies and listened to stories about the old days vanished. The carefully constructed dam I'd built inside my soul to separate my 2 lives didn't just crack. It vaporized. The scent of jasmine and damp earth always brought me back to a place of peace. It was the smell of my mother's garden, her sanctuary. Her name is Eleanor, and at 72 years old, her hands, gnarled with arthritis, could still coax life from the most stubborn soil. I was sitting on the porch steps, nursing a lukewarm coffee, watching her prune her prize-winning roses. The sun was warm on my face, a gentle spring afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood that was supposed to be a world away from the one I'd just left. For the past 15 years, my world had been dust, sand, and the sharp, metallic tang of cordite. Coming home was always a system shock. Here, the loudest noise was a lawnmower a few blocks over. The biggest threat was a stray cat digging up the petunias. It was supposed to be safe. My mother hummed a gospel tune, her back to me. She was a small woman, barely 5'3", but she had the constitution of an old oak tree. She'd raised me on her own, worked 2 jobs, and never once let the world's bitterness poison her spirit. Watching her now, in her faded floral apron and wide-brimmed straw hat, I felt a wave of protective love so fierce it almost hurt. I was trying to recalibrate, to shed the skin of the person I had to be out there, and remember how to be the daughter she raised. They call it hypervigilance, a side effect of the job. I call it seeing the world in angles and exits. Even now, in this idyllic scene, I'd already clocked the 2 potential ingress points to the yard, the weak spot in the back fence, and the way the neighbor's second-story window had a clear line of sight to our porch. Old habits. The disruption, when it came, wasn't a bang, but a whine. A nasal, entitled whine from over the hedge. Eleanor, I have asked you repeatedly about that rosebush. I sighed. Cynthia, our new neighbor. She'd moved in 6 months ago from some gated community and seemed to believe the entire block was her personal homeowners association. She was a woman who used her complaints like currency. My mother straightened up slowly, a hand on her lower back. Good afternoon, Cynthia. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Her voice was calm, sweet as honey, but with an underlying firmness that I knew well. It was the voice that had guided me through scraped knees and my first heartbreak. It would be, Cynthia snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger, if your foliage wasn't encroaching on my property. That branch is at least 6 inches over the property line. I've measured. I took a slow sip of my coffee. This was the 3rd time this week. My mother had already explained that the bush had been there for 30 years, and that a single branch posed no threat to Cynthia's pristine, lifeless lawn of artificial turf. I'll trim it back for you this evening, Cynthia, when the sun isn't so high, my mother said, her patience a testament to her faith. No, I want it dealt with now. It's a violation, a hazard. I've already called the authorities. My spine went rigid. The authorities? For a rose bush? I stood up, the old wooden step groaning under my weight. My movements are always quiet, economical. I'd learned long ago that wasted motion gets you killed. I walked to the edge of the porch, not in a threatening way, but just to be present, to be a factor in the equation. "Ma'am," I said, my voice level, "it's a branch. My mother said she'd trim it. There's no need to waste police resources." Cynthia's eyes, small and hard, flicked to me. She saw a tall, athletic black woman, with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a stillness about her that made people uncomfortable. She didn't see a daughter. She saw a threat. "I'm not speaking to you," she sniffed. "I'm speaking to the homeowner, and I've already made the call." As if on cue, a police cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb. 2 officers got out. One was young, barely old enough to shave, with the puffed-up chest of someone who'd just been given a badge and a gun, and was itching to use the authority that came with them. The other was older, maybe late 40s, with a sour, curdled look on his face, and the kind of gut that spoke of too many years riding in a car and eating bad diner food. He was the one with the K9 unit. A Belgian Malinois, lean and tense, sat in the back, its silhouette a dark promise of violence. I felt the first real prickle of alarm. A K9 unit for a gardening dispute? The older officer Miller sauntered up to Cynthia, completely ignoring my mother and me. He listened to her exaggerated, tearful tale of harassment and property destruction. She pointed at the offending rose branch as if it were a loaded gun aimed at her house. The younger officer, Davis, stood by, his hand resting a little too casually on the butt of his sidearm. I stepped off the porch and moved to my mother's side. "Officers," I said, keeping my voice low and respectful. It's a tone I perfected over years of dealing with volatile men in power. "My name is Sarah. This is my mother, Eleanor. There seems to be a misunderstanding." Miller finally turned his gaze on us. His eyes were flat, disinterested. "No misunderstanding. Your mother was asked to trim her bush. She refused." "That's not true," my mother said, her voice trembling slightly now. "I told her I would trim it this evening." "She's lying," Cynthia shrieked. "She threatened me. Her daughter came out here and threatened me too." My entire body went cold. I've been trained to control my heart rate, to breathe through chaos, to see a lie for what it is, a tactical maneuver. But this was my mother. "That is an absolute fabrication," I said, the steel in my voice a little more pronounced. I took a half step forward, putting myself slightly in front of my mother. I noted Miller's stance, the way his weight was distributed, the tension in his shoulders. I saw Davis's eyes darting between me, my mother, and his senior officer, looking for a cue. "You need to step back," Miller grunted, his hand dropping to rest on his belt near his cuffs. "Both of you. Put your hands where I can see them." "For what?" my mother asked, her voice a mix of confusion and indignation. "For gardening in my own yard?" "We've had a report of a threat," Miller said, his eyes locking onto me. "And you look like you could be a threat." This was how it started, the escalation, the pretext. I've seen this playbook run in a dozen countries, in 100 different situations. It's always the same. Dehumanize, intimidate, control. "Sir, we are not a threat to anyone," I said, slowly raising my empty hands. "We are just trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon." My mother, however, had had enough. She was not a soldier. She was a 72-year-old woman being harassed on her own property. She let out a frustrated sigh and turned away from them, intending to walk back to her porch. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. That was all it took. "Non-compliance," Miller barked. He took a step toward the car and opened the rear door. The Malinois shot out, a blur of fur and teeth, held back only by a taut leather leash. It wasn't a dog. It was a loaded weapon, and it was aimed directly at my mother's back. "Sir, stand down," I commanded, the word "sir" tasting like ash in my mouth. My voice dropped to a register it hadn't occupied since I was stateside. It was the voice of someone used to giving orders and having them followed without question. It only enraged him. Maybe it was my tone, maybe it was the challenge, or maybe it was just who he was. He looked at my elderly, retreating mother. He looked at me, and then he let the leash go slack. "Get her," he said. The world seemed to slow down, the colors sharpening to a painful degree. I saw the dog launch itself forward. I saw the muscles in its haunches bunch and release. I heard my mother's terrified gasp as she turned, her eyes wide. I heard the sickening sound of teeth sinking into the soft flesh of her arm, tearing through her floral apron and the cardigan beneath. Her scream was a high, thin sound of pure agony that sliced through the peaceful afternoon air, and straight into my soul. I saw it all. The dog savagely shaking its head. My mother's blood starting to stain the sleeve of her sweater, a bright, shocking crimson. I saw the smug, satisfied smirk on Officer Miller's face. I saw the look of pure, unadulterated shock and horror on the rookie Davis's face as he realized what had just happened. For a full second I was frozen, not by fear but by a sudden, absolute clarity. The thin veneer of civilization, the carefully constructed identity of Sarah, the loving daughter, it all cracked, shattered, and fell away like dust. The quiet suburban street vanished. The scent of jasmine was replaced by the coppery smell of blood. The world went silent, the bird song and the distant lawnmower fading into nothing. The only thing I could hear was the frantic beat of my own heart, a war drum calling me home from a place they couldn't even imagine. They had just unleashed a dog on my mother, and in doing so, they had just unleashed me. Time didn't just slow down, it fractured. Each microsecond became a crystal-clear frame of information for me to process. Frame 1, the dog's jaw, locked. The puncture wounds, deep. The tearing motion, designed to maim. Frame 2, my mother's face, a mask of agony and shock, her body starting to go limp. Frame 3, Miller's expression of smug dominance. Frame 4, Cynthia's hand flying to her mouth, a theatrical gasp of horror that was pure performance. Frame 5, the rookie, Davis, his face paling, a silent "oh God" forming on his lips. My brain processed it all, discarded the irrelevant data. Cynthia, Davis's shock, and focused on the two critical variables, the threat and the asset, the dog and my mother. I didn't run. I moved. It was a single, fluid explosion of kinetic energy from a dead stop. 3 steps. That's all it took to close the 15 feet between the porch and my mother. My mind was a cold, quiet place, the roaring inferno of rage banked down to a single, white-hot pilot light of purpose. Objective: remove threat. Preserve asset. My left hand shot out, not for the dog's collar, but for the loose skin at the back of its neck, just behind the skull. My grip was absolute. At the same time, my right hand, fingers rigid and curled into a claw, drove upwards into the soft tissue just beneath the dog's jaw. I found the nerve cluster instantly. It's a technique designed to induce overwhelming, system-shocking pain. There was a strangled yelp, a sound of pure agony from the animal, and its jaw went slack for a fraction of a second as its nervous system overloaded. That was the opening. In that instant, I wrenched its head sideways with a brutal twist of my wrist, breaking its hold on my mother's arm. I didn't stop there. The threat wasn't neutralized, it was just disengaged. As my mother stumbled back, I drove the heel of my boot into the dog's floating ribs. There was a wet, cracking sound, and the animal collapsed, whining and gasping for air on the lawn. It was incapacitated. Total time elapsed. Less than 2 seconds. I didn't spare the downed dog a second glance. I spun, catching my mother before she hit the ground. "I have you, Mom." "I have you," I murmured, my voice now a low, calming frequency meant only for her. I lowered her gently to the grass, away from the whimpering animal. Her eyes were glazed with pain. "Sarah." My arm. "I know, Mom. Look at me. Just look at me and breathe." My hands were already at work, tearing a long strip from the hem of my own t-shirt. The bite was bad, viciously, horribly bad. It was a deep, ragged series of punctures and tears, and the blood was pulsing, not flowing. Arterial. Damn it! I wrapped the makeshift bandage tight above the wound, applying pressure with the heel of my hand. "It's okay. We're going to stop this." My field medicine training was 15 years of muscle memory. Triage, pressure, elevation, tourniquet if needed. I was already calculating the time before shock would set in. That's when the outside world came roaring back. "Get your hands off her! Get on the ground! On the ground! Now!" It was Miller, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He was staring at his dog, which was trying and failing to get to its feet, then at me, as if he couldn't comprehend what he'd just seen. I didn't look up. My focus was entirely on my mother's pale face, and the crimson stain spreading through the white fabric of my improvised pressure bandage. "Davis!" I barked, my voice cutting through the air like a razor. I used the rookie's name, a calculated move to separate him from his partner. "Your partner has just committed aggravated assault with a deadly weapon on a 72-year-old woman. She is bleeding from the brachial artery. If an ambulance is not here in 10 minutes, she will die. Your partner's actions and your inaction will be the cause. Call it. Now." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Davis flinch, his hand going to his radio instinctively. "Don't you move, Davis," Miller screamed, finally snapping out of his stupor. He drew his taser, the yellow and black of it, a splash of ugly color against the green lawn. He aimed it squarely at my back. I said, "Get on the ground. You are under arrest for assaulting a police officer." I slowly, deliberately, turned my head to look at him over my shoulder. I kept one hand firmly pressed on my mother's wound. I let him see the cold, utter absence of fear in my eyes. I let him see the promise of what would happen if he made one more move. Your officer is an animal, which you use to unlawfully attack a civilian, an elderly civilian. You gave the order. You are responsible. Every person on this street is a witness. I glanced pointedly at Cynthia, who was now hiding behind her perfectly manicured hedge, her face white as a sheet. Now, for the last time, have your partner call for medical assistance, or I will be forced to hold you personally and legally responsible for my mother's death. I'm giving you one more warning, he shouted, his hand trembling. The taser's red laser dots danced on my shoulder blade. He was losing control, his rage overriding his training. He was becoming more dangerous, more unpredictable. I saw the flicker of indecision in his eyes. He was committed. His ego wouldn't let him back down. He was going to fire. I shifted my weight ever so slightly, preparing to shield my mother with my own body, preparing to absorb the 50,000 volts and still function. I've been tased before. I knew what was coming. But then Davis, the rookie, spoke up, his voice shaking. Sir, she's right. The woman. She's bleeding bad. We have to call it in. Miller's head snapped toward his partner. You shut your mouth, rookie. Are you questioning my command? That was the moment. The schism. Miller was so focused on his insubordinate partner that his attention on me wavered for a split second. It was a fatal mistake. Not for him, not yet. But for his authority. In that instant he lost control of his partner. He lost control of the scene, and he lost control of me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was far from over. He couldn't let this go. He would need to reassert his dominance, and he would do it with overwhelming force. His eyes snapped back to me, filled with a homicidal rage that was terrifyingly clear. He raised the taser again, his finger tightening on the trigger. This is your last chance, he hissed, spitting the words. On the ground. The ground wasn't an option. Going to the ground meant taking my hands off my mother's wound. It meant giving up control. It meant she would bleed out on her own perfect lawn, while a man with a fragile ego and a taser played God. I looked at the twin red dots painted on my shoulder. Then I looked directly into Officer Miller's eyes. He saw something there that made him flinch, a glimpse of the abyss I'd lived in for 15 years. But his rage was stronger than his fear. Last chance, he breathed, and his fingers squeezed. I heard the pop and sizzle a split second before the barbs would have hit me. In that sliver of time, my body moved without conscious thought. It wasn't a panicked flail. It was a precise, economical pivot at the waist. I kept my hand on my mother's arm, the source of pressure unwavering, while my upper body twisted. My free hand, my right hand, came up and swept forward, not to block the taser itself, but to intercept Miller's forearm. I didn't grab it. I struck it, my rigid hand connecting with the radial nerve. His arm went numb instantly. His grip failed. The taser clattered to the grass. The twin barbs, connected by their glittering wires, slammed into the turf beside me, discharging their 50,000 volts uselessly into the damp soil. The crackling sound was furious, impotent. Miller stared at his hand, then at me, his face a canvas of disbelief. He had pulled the trigger. He had committed. And nothing had happened. Or rather, something impossible had happened. A civilian, a woman kneeling on the ground tending to a wound, had just disarmed him without even standing up. The rookie, Davis, finally reacted. He fumbled for his own sidearm, pulling it from its holster with shaky hands. Don't move. Police. Don't move, he stammered, his voice breaking. He was pointing the gun at me, but his eyes were wide with terror, not aggression. He wasn't aiming at a perpetrator. He was aiming at a phenomenon he couldn't understand. I ignored him. I turned my full attention back to my mother, repositioning my hand on the bandage. It's all right, Mom, I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear me over the ringing in her own ears. Help is coming. The distant wail of sirens was growing louder, closer, a symphony of rescue and reinforcement. For Miller, it meant backup. For me, it meant a ticking clock. The narrative of this encounter was about to be set in stone, and the man holding the pen would be the one with the badge, not the one with the truth. 2 more cruisers and an ambulance screamed onto our quiet suburban street, lights painting the houses in frantic strokes of red and blue. Paramedics spilled out of the ambulance, their movements professional and urgent. 2 more officers, one a burly man with sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, emerged from the lead car. "What the hell is going on here, Miller?" the sergeant demanded, his eyes taking in the entire chaotic tableau. My mother on the ground, me covered in her blood, the whimpering canine, the discarded taser, and his two officers, one disarmed and seething, the other holding a gun with a two-handed grip that couldn't stop his hands from shaking. "She assaulted me, Sarge," Miller bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She attacked my canine. She resisted arrest. She's out of her mind." The paramedics swarmed around my mother, and I reluctantly relinquished my position, giving them a rapid clinical report. 72-year-old female, single dog, bite to the right arm, deep lacerations and punctures, possible brachial artery involvement, applied direct pressure. She's conscious but in shock. The lead paramedic, a woman with calm, intelligent eyes, looked from the wound to my face, a flicker of professional respect in her gaze. She understood I knew what I was talking about. "We've got it," she said, and they began their work with practiced efficiency. The sergeant, a man who looked like he'd seen everything and was tired of all of it, approached me slowly. His name tag read, Riley. "Ma'am, I need you to stay right there." His voice was low, non-threatening, but it carried an undeniable weight of command. He was trying to de-escalate, to regain control. I stood up slowly, my hands raised and open to show they were empty. Blood, my mother's blood, was drying on them. "Sergeant," I said, my voice as level and calm as I could make it, "your officer, Miller, unleashed his dog on my elderly mother after she agreed to trim a rosebush. There was no threat. There was no provocation. It was a malicious and unwarranted act of violence. I disengaged the animal to save my mother's life. When I rendered aid, Officer Miller attempted to tase me while I was applying pressure to an arterial bleed. I deflected his arm to prevent him from stopping me." Riley's eyes flickered toward Miller, then to the rookie, Davis, who was now lowering his weapon, looking utterly lost. "She's lying," Miller shouted. "Look at my dog. She nearly killed him. She came at me like a damn demon." "Your dog will recover," I said, my voice dropping an octave, the coldness returning. "My mother might lose her arm, or her life. The actions taken here were to preserve life, Sergeant. His," I nodded at Miller, "were to inflict harm." Riley held up a hand to silence Miller. He looked at me, a long, hard appraisal. He saw the blood, the intensity, the almost unnerving stillness I possessed. He saw a problem he didn't know how to solve. He was a beat cop, a supervisor. He dealt with thugs and drunks and domestic disputes. He didn't know what he was looking at, but his instincts were screaming that I was not a person to be trifled with. My mother was being loaded onto a gurney, an oxygen mask over her face. Her eyes found mine, filled with fear and confusion. I gave her a small, reassuring nod, trying to pour every ounce of strength I had into that one gesture. "I will handle this. I will fix this." "Sarge, are you going to let her just stand there?" Miller demanded, his voice laced with venom. "She assaulted an officer of the law. Cuff her." Sergeant Riley's jaw tightened. He was caught. On one hand, the optics were a nightmare, a bleeding grandmother, a taser on the lawn. On the other, he had an officer claiming assault, and an injured K9. Protocol was protocol. His face hardened with resignation. He had to make a choice, and he chose the path of least resistance, the one that protected the blue line. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, all attempts at de-escalation gone, "I am not making a judgment here, but based on my officer's statement and the injuries to the K9 unit, I have to place you under temporary detainment until we can get this sorted out." He unclipped his handcuffs. "I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." I watched the ambulance doors close, swallowing my mother into the sterile white box. The sirens started up again, a mournful wail that receded down the street, taking the only piece of my world that mattered with it. I was alone, surrounded by hostile uniforms, my mother's blood still warm on my skin. He thought he was detaining a hysterical daughter. He had no idea who he was putting his hands on. The cold, familiar click of the steel cuffs ratcheting shut around my wrists felt less like a restraint and more like a key turning in a lock, unleashing something he and his entire department were terrifyingly unprepared for. The ride to the station was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last hour. I sat in the back of Sergeant Riley's cruiser, the cage's metal grid pressing a cold pattern against my cheek. I wasn't looking at the familiar suburban streets blurring past. My focus was internal. The rage was still there, a controlled burn deep in my core, but my mind was operating with the detached clarity of a mission briefing. Assess, plan, execute. The mission had changed. It was no longer about immediate survival. It was about control, control of the narrative, control of the legal battle to come, and control of the consequences that were going to rain down on Officer Miller. Riley watched me in the rearview mirror. He was trying to read me, trying to categorize me. Was I a flight risk, violent, mentally unstable? He saw none of the usual signs. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't rattling the cage. I was perfectly, unnaturally still. The silence seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited, the words sounding tired and rote. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I let him finish. When he was done, I spoke, my voice calm and even, devoid of any emotion. "Sergeant Riley, I want my phone call. I also want you to listen to me very carefully. Your Officer Miller violated my mother's civil rights under color of law. He used excessive and unjustified force. He then obstructed me from rendering life-saving medical aid. His partner, Officer Davis, is a witness to all of it. So is a civilian neighbor, Cynthia Peterson, at 1412 Elm Street. I am formally notifying you, as his supervising officer, of these facts. Your department's handling of this situation from this moment forward will determine its level of culpability. I suggest you proceed with extreme caution." Riley's eyes met mine in the mirror again. There was a flicker of something new in them. Not fear, but a dawning unease. I hadn't made a threat. I had stated a series of facts and potential outcomes. It was the language of liability, of lawsuits, of careers ending. It was a language he understood. He didn't respond, just turned his eyes back to the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. At the station they processed me. Fingerprints, mugshots. The indignity of it was a dull ache compared to the fiery worry for my mother. They put me in a small, windowless interrogation room. Gray cinderblock walls, a heavy metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs. Standard procedure. They were trying to disorient me, to make me feel powerless. It was a wasted effort. I'd spent weeks in places that would make this room look like a luxury suite. I sat and waited. I used the time. I ran through the events again and again, breaking them down into tactical moments, legal arguments, and media sound bites. I catalogued every word spoken, every action taken. I replayed Miller's smug expression, Davis's panic, Cynthia's theatrical fear. They were all pieces on a board. After about an hour, the door opened. It wasn't Riley. It was a detective, a man in a rumpled suit with a coffee-stained tie. He looked exhausted. He dropped a thin file on the table and sat down opposite me. "Sarah Williams," he said, opening the file. "Says here you're 38, unemployed, living with your mother." He looked up at me, expecting a reaction. I gave him nothing. "We're looking at some serious charges here, Sarah," he continued, leaning forward in a conspiratorial way. "Assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, interference. That K9 is an officer of the law, you know. You assaulted 2 cops today. That's heavy." I remained silent. I let him talk. It's the first rule of any interrogation. Let the other side reveal their position. He was trying to intimidate me, to frame the narrative as me being the aggressor. Now, Officer Miller is a respected, 20-year veteran of the force. His partner corroborates his story. Says you went berserk, attacked the dog for no reason, and then came after him. We have a civilian witness who says you were threatening and aggressive. He was bluffing, at least about Davis and Cynthia. I saw their faces. They wouldn't corroborate that story. Not credibly, anyway. He sighed, trying a different tack. "Look, I see you're worried about your mother. I get it. The thing is, this can all go a lot easier for you. If you cooperate, maybe we can get these charges reduced. Maybe you just got scared, overreacted. We can work with that." I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it filled the small room. "My name is Sarah Williams. I have invoked my right to remain silent. I will not be answering any questions. I have requested my phone call. I'm requesting it again. Provide me with a phone, or I will consider this an unlawful detention." The detective's friendly mask dropped. His eyes hardened. "You're in a lot of trouble, lady. You don't get to make demands." "It's not a demand," I corrected him calmly. "It is my constitutional right. One you are currently violating." He stared at me for a long moment, then pushed his chair back violently and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Another hour passed. The silence was a weapon they were trying to use against me, but Solitude and I were old friends. Finally, the door opened again. It was Sergeant Riley. He didn't come in. He just stood in the doorway. "Your phone call," he said, his voice flat. He handed me a beat-up landline phone. "I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I had one call I needed to make first. The number was one I knew by heart, one I hadn't dialed in over a year. I punched in the 11 digits. It rang 3 times, then a gruff, familiar voice answered, not with a hello, but with a single questioning word. Williams? General, I said, my voice steady. I have a situation. I need a cleanup crew. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling, then a keyboard clicking. Civilian or professional? He asked. His tone was all business. Civilian. Local law enforcement, overreach, extreme prejudice. I chose my words carefully. They were code, a language we had spoken for years. Location? Northwood Police Department, suburb of Chicago. Understood. Are you compromised? He asked. The question wasn't about the handcuffs or the interrogation room. It was about whether I had broken my own code of conduct. Negative, General, I said. All actions were defensive. Preservation of a non-combatant. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. The non-combatant is my mother. The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't tactical, it was heavy. General Marcus Thorne had been my commanding officer in the unit for a decade. He knew I had no family besides my mother. He knew she was the one thing in the world that was off limits, the one anchor I had to a normal life. I see, he said, his voice now like chips of granite. Sit tight, Williams. Help is on the way. I'm spinning up the lawyers, and a few other assets. No one touches your mother. He was about to hang up, but then he added one more thing, a sentence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. And Sarah, I'm calling in the Wolf. The Wolf. Hearing that name in this context sent a jolt through my system, a feeling colder and more profound than any fear the Northwood Police Department could ever hope to inspire. The Wolf wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't an asset in the traditional sense. He was a ghost, a legend even within the shadowy corridors of special operations. His real name was known to maybe 3 people on the planet, General Thorne being one of them. His specialty wasn't winning in court. It was dismantling. He didn't just find cracks in an organization's foundation. He was the earthquake that turned the whole structure to dust. He was a weapon of last resort, the one you called when the rules of engagement had been irrevocably broken. Calling in the Wolf was like calling in a tactical nuke for a fistfight, and the general had just done it for my mother. The phone clicked dead in my hand. I handed it back to Riley, my expression unreadable. He saw a prisoner who had just made a phone call. He had no idea he had just witnessed the pulling of a pin on a grenade that would detonate his entire world. I sat back down in the chair, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I allowed myself to feel a sliver of something other than cold rage. It was the grim, absolute certainty of retribution. The gears were turning now, massive, silent, and unstoppable. They left me alone for another 2 hours. A pathetic attempt to let me stew. Around the 4-hour mark, the door opened again. It was the rumpled detective and Sergeant Riley. The detective was holding a fresh cup of coffee, and he looked smug. "All right, Sarah," he said, setting the coffee down on the table, just out of my reach. "We've had a chat with your neighbor, Cynthia. Turns out she saw the whole thing. Says you were the aggressor from the moment you stepped off the porch. Says your mother was belligerent. Her statement fully supports Officer Miller's report." He smiled, a greasy, self-satisfied expression. "It's 2 officers and a civilian witness against you. This isn't looking good." I didn't react. Cynthia was a coward and a liar. Her testimony would be emotionally driven and filled with inconsistencies. It was worthless under scrutiny. But they didn't know that I knew that. They were trying to build a cage of evidence around me, to make me feel trapped, hopeless. "And your mother," the detective continued, his tone shifting to one of mock sympathy. "She's out of surgery, stable. But the damage was significant. Doctors aren't sure about the nerve function in her arm. A real shame. He was using my mother's condition as a psychological lever, trying to break me. My heart clenched at the news, a stab of pure agony, but I locked it down. I kept my face a mask of stone. Showing emotion was showing weakness, and weakness was a currency they would spend against me. "So here's the deal," he said, leaning on the table. "We're prepared to offer one. Plead guilty to resisting arrest and interference. We'll drop the assault charges. You'll get probation, maybe some community service. You get to go home and take care of your mom. You refuse, we go to trial, and with these statements, you're going to prison for a long, long time, and your mother will be all alone." It was a classic squeeze play. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was just some angry, unemployed woman with a chip on her shoulder. They had constructed their reality, and it was tidy and convenient, and put them squarely in the right. The silence stretched. I let it hang in the air until it became uncomfortable for them. Then I slowly lifted my head and looked the detective dead in the eye. "Is that the best you can do?" I asked, my voice a soft, dangerous whisper. Before he could respond with the angry retort that was already forming on his lips, there was a sharp knock at the door. Riley opened it a crack, and a uniformed officer whispered something to him. Riley's face went pale. He turned back to the detective. "We have a problem," he muttered. "What is it?" the detective snapped, annoyed at the interruption. "There's a lawyer here to see her," Riley said, "and someone else." "Tell him to wait," the detective grunted, turning back to me. "We're not done here." "I don't think you understand," Riley said, his voice strained. "He's not a wait in the lobby kind of lawyer. His name is Benjamin Carter." The detective's smug expression dissolved. Even I had heard of Benjamin Carter. He was a legendary defense attorney, a shark who represented senators and CEOs, not people in suburban holding cells. The idea of him showing up here was ludicrous. "And the other guy?" the detective asked, a note of dread in his voice. Riley swallowed hard. "He didn't give a name. He just showed a federal ID, said he was here to observe." A quiet knock echoed again, and the door swung open. A man in a suit so exquisitely tailored it probably cost more than my car stepped into the room. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that held a terrifying intelligence. This was Benjamin Carter. Behind him, a second man lingered in the doorway, half in shadow. He was unassuming, dressed in a simple gray polo shirt and slacks. He could have been an IT guy, an accountant, anyone, but I knew. The stillness, the way his eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail, every person, every potential threat in a single, sweeping glance. The way he moved with an impossible economy of motion. It was him. It was the wolf. Carter strode to the table and placed a gleaming leather briefcase on its surface. He gave me a brief, assessing nod. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice a low, powerful baritone. "I'm Benjamin Carter. I've been retained to represent you. This interrogation is over." He turned to the two cops, his gaze dismissive and cold. "Detective Sergeant, you will leave the room now. You will not speak to my client again without my express presence and consent. Furthermore, all charges against her are to be dropped immediately." The detective scoffed, a last gasp of bravado. "You can't be serious. We have 3 sworn statements." Carter cut him off, not by raising his voice but by lowering it. "You have perjured testimony from 2 compromised officers, and a coerced statement from a panicked civilian. What I have," he said, clicking open his briefcase, "is the truth." He pulled out a slim tablet and swiveled it to face the 2 cops. On the screen was a video, crystal clear, with perfect audio. It was a view from above, from the second-story window of the house across the street. It showed everything. It showed my mother peacefully gardening. It showed Cynthia's belligerent whining. It showed my calm attempts to de-escalate. And then, in horrifying detail, it showed Officer Miller, unprovoked, unleash his dog on a 72-year-old woman's back. It showed him aiming his taser at me while I tried to save her life. The audio was so clear you could hear Miller's command, "Get her." You could hear my mother's scream. You could hear every lie they had told crumble to dust in the face of indisputable, high-definition reality. Riley and the detective stared at the screen, their faces turning the color of ash. The detective's jaw hung open. They weren't just looking at a video. They were looking at the smoking ruin of their careers, at felony charges, at the end of their lives as they knew it. "This video," Carter said calmly, turning the tablet back toward himself, "has already been uploaded to a secure server, and copies have been dispatched to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and the 3 biggest news outlets in Chicago. The narrative you've been trying so hard to build is over. Now, we're going to talk about my narrative." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. "And my story begins with the immediate and unconditional release of my client." The interrogation room felt like a vacuum, all the air sucked out by the sheer gravity of Carter's pronouncement. The detective, whose name I still didn't know and didn't care to, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. Sergeant Riley, for his part, simply looked defeated. He wasn't a bad cop, I realized. He was just a weak one, a man who followed the path of least resistance until it led him off a cliff. Now he was standing at the bottom, looking up at the wreckage. The wolf hadn't moved from the doorway. He hadn't said a word. But his presence was a physical weight in the room. He was the silent confirmation that this wasn't just a high-powered lawyer throwing his weight around. This was something else entirely. This was a reckoning. Carter snapped his briefcase shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. "Sergeant," he said, not even glancing at the detective. "The paperwork for Ms. Williams's release. Now. And I want her personal effects returned to her, untouched. I trust they haven't been misplaced?" Riley just nodded numbly and backed out of the room, nearly bumping into the wolf. The detective followed him, scuttling out like a crab, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by the naked, clammy fear of a man who suddenly understands the true scale of his miscalculation. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with Carter and the wolf. Carter turned to me, his professional mask softening slightly. "Ms. Williams, I'm glad we got here in time. General Thorne sends his regards. He also informed me of your mother's condition. We have already arranged for her to be transferred to Northwestern Memorial, where a top vascular surgeon is waiting. The transfer is happening as we speak." A wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled my knees washed over me. The local hospital was fine, but Northwestern, that was another level. That was the best. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "Don't thank me," Carter said. "Thank the general. He's very persuasive." He glanced toward the man in the doorway. "And his resources are unparalleled." The wolf finally stepped fully into the room. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. He looked at me, and his eyes, for the first time, focused on mine. They were a pale, washed-out gray, and they saw everything. There was no judgment in them, no sympathy, just a deep, quiet understanding. He knew what I was. He was the same. "The video," I said, looking from him to Carter. "The neighbor's window?" The wolf gave a barely perceptible nod. "Surveillance is a hobby of his," he said. His voice was flat, without inflection. "A retired NSA analyst, very meticulous about his home security. Had a 4K camera with a directional microphone pointed at the street. A fortunate coincidence." I knew better. There were no coincidences in the wolf's world. He hadn't just found the footage. He'd probably had a team sweep the entire neighborhood's digital footprint, pulling every byte of data from every doorbell camera, every Wi-Fi network, every cell phone tower, until he found what he needed. He hadn't gotten lucky. He had manufactured his own luck through overwhelming technical superiority. "Cynthia Peterson's coerced statement has been recanted," the wolf continued, his voice still a monotone. "Her husband is a partner at a downtown law firm. When presented with irrefutable video evidence of his wife conspiring with police to file a false report, he was cooperative. He understood the potential for disbarment." "And Officer Davis?" I asked. "The rookie," Carter chimed in, "is currently in a closed-door meeting with Internal Affairs and a representative from the U.S. Attorney's Office. He has been granted immunity in exchange for his full and truthful testimony against Officer Miller. His career in law enforcement is over, but he will avoid prison." He took the deal 30 seconds after seeing the video. It was breathtakingly efficient. In the space of a few hours, they had not just dismantled the case against me. They had methodically dissected the entire department's credibility, isolated the key players, and flipped them, one by one. The door opened and Riley came back in, holding my small canvas bag of personal effects. He avoided my gaze, setting the bag on the table. "You're free to go, ma'am," he mumbled. "All charges have been dropped." I stood up, the feeling of freedom anticlimactic. This wasn't a victory. It was just the end of the first battle. Miller was still out there. As if reading my thoughts, the wolf spoke. "Officer Miller has been suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the federal investigation." He paused. "He was placed on suicide watch an hour ago, after he made threats against you and your mother to his sergeant. He is currently under observation." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Miller wasn't just a bully with a badge. He was unstable. He had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his K-9 partner in the space of an afternoon. A man like that, backed into a corner, doesn't just surrender. He lashes out. "He's a threat," I stated simply. "He is a problem," the wolf corrected me, "that is being managed." There was a finality in his tone that was more chilling than any overt threat. Carter escorted me out through a back exit, bypassing the main lobby. The wolf melted away as silently as he had appeared. We stepped out into the cool night air. A black town car was idling at the curb, its engine a low hum. "This will take you to the hospital," Carter said, opening the door for me. "I'll handle the press and the initial filings for the civil suit. We're suing the department, the city, and Miller personally. We are going to own them, Ms. Williams." I got into the car, sinking into the plush leather. As we pulled away from the station, I looked back at the squat, ugly brick building. It was just a place, but it represented a system that had tried to chew me up and spit me out, a system that had brutalized my mother over a rose bush. They had failed. They had picked a fight with the wrong person's daughter. The ride to Northwestern was a blur of city lights. All I could think about was my mother. When I arrived, a hospital administrator was waiting for me, personally escorting me to the surgical ICU waiting area. The general's reach was long. After an agonizing hour, the surgeon came out. He was a kind-faced man with tired eyes. "Ms. Williams, I'm Dr. Aris. Your mother's surgery was successful. We were able to repair the artery and the primary nerve bundles. It was a very severe injury. The dog's teeth shredded much of the tissue." He looked at me, his expression grave. "The next 48 hours are critical. We're watching for infection and monitoring blood flow to the hand. She's strong, but she has a very long road to recovery ahead of her." I could finally breathe. She was alive. She was stable. I sat by her bedside for hours, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, listening to the rhythmic beep of the monitors. She looked so small and fragile in the hospital bed, her arm wrapped in a mountain of white bandages. The anger I had kept so tightly coiled began to bubble up again, hot and acidic. Miller had done this. My phone, returned to me from my bag, buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. There were no words, just a single, grainy attachment. It was a security camera still. The timestamp was from 10 minutes ago. It showed Officer Miller dressed in street clothes walking out of the back door of the Northwood police station. He wasn't supposed to be released from observation. He was supposed to be managed. He was out, and he was heading for his car. The image on my phone screen was a punch to the gut. Miller, out. The calculated assurances from the wolf about him being managed evaporated into a puff of smoke. Managed? The man was walking free, his face in the grainy photo a mask of grim determination. He wasn't heading home to lick his wounds. A man like Miller, a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in the power of his uniform and the fear he inspired, doesn't just walk away when that's stripped from him. He doubles down. He finds a target for his rage, a focus for his humiliation. And we were the targets. Me and my mother, lying helpless in this hospital bed. My blood ran cold. The hospital, which moments before had felt like a sanctuary, a fortress of healing, suddenly felt terribly vulnerable. It was a maze of public corridors, multiple entrances, and overworked staff. A man with a badge, even a suspended one, knows how to navigate these places, how to blend in, how to use his inherent authority to get past checkpoints. I stood up, my mind racing, shifting instantly from worried daughter back to tactical operator. Threat assessment. Miller, unstable, armed. I had to assume he had personal weapons, and motivated by revenge. Location. Unknown, but mobile. Objective. Likely targeting my mother as the source of his downfall, or me as the agent of it. The hospital was the most logical target. I walked to the door of my mother's room, peering out into the quiet ICU hallway. A single nurse sat at a central station, her back to me, focused on a computer screen. The quiet hum of medical equipment was the only sound. It was the illusion of security. I pulled out my phone. My first instinct was to call the wolf's handler, General Thorne, but that would take time. Explanations, authorizations. Time was a luxury I didn't have. Miller could be minutes away. I needed eyes and ears. I needed control of the environment. My thumb hovered over the general's number, but then I scrolled to a different contact. A name I hadn't called in years. Hacker. A simple, descriptive moniker for a man whose digital skills were borderline supernatural. We'd worked together on a handful of deniable ops where our digital footprint had to be zero. He owed me. I'd pulled his bacon out of a very hot fire in Yemen. He answered on the second ring, his voice a flurry of keyboard clicks and the low thrum of servers in the background. Ghost. To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you're stateside. There was no time for pleasantries. Hacker, I have a priority one emergency. Civilian context. I need a real-time trace and a digital lockdown. Now. Whoa, slow down. Civilian. You know I don't do. My mother is the target. I cut him off, the words sharp as glass. Ex-cop, unstable, just got released from custody, and he's coming after her. She's at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Chicago. His name is Robert Miller, 48 years old. Badge number 714, Northwood PD. The keyboard clicking stopped. Your mother, say no more. Give me 60 seconds. I could hear him breathing. Then the furious clatter of keys, faster than I'd ever heard from anyone. It was the sound of a master at work. While he worked, I walked out to the nurse's station. "Excuse me," I said to the nurse. She looked up, startled. "My mother in room 412. I'm her daughter." I have reason to believe we may have a security situation. Is there a protocol for a potential external threat? She blinked, confused. A threat? Ma'am, this is a secure floor. Security is a state of mind, not a locked door, I said, my voice low but firm. Who is your head of security, and how do I contact him? My phone buzzed in my hand. A map of the city appeared on the screen, a blinking red dot moving steadily south on the expressway. Hacker had found him. A text popped up beneath it. Got him. Triangulated his cell. He's driving a 2018 Ford Explorer, registered to his wife. ETA to your location is 17 minutes. Sending you hospital schematics now. Accessing their internal security feed. 17 minutes. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. Blueprints of the hospital layered onto my screen, showing entrances, stairwells, and security camera locations. A second window popped up, a mosaic of black and white video feeds from the hospital's own cameras. I now had eyes on every entrance. The nurse, flustered, was dialing her supervisor. I didn't have time for their chain of command. I walked to the main doors of the ICU wing. A keypad lock. Simple. I looked at the nurse, who was now speaking in hushed, urgent tones on the phone. She wouldn't give me the code. I turned my attention to the door. It was a standard commercial electronic lock. I knelt down, pretending to tie my shoe, and examined the frame. I didn't have my tools, but years of training had taught me improvisation. I pulled a bobby pin from my bun. I always kept a few. They were more useful than a knife in some situations, and straightened it. It wasn't ideal, but it might be enough to trip the magnetic switch if I could get it in the gap. Ma'am, you can't, the nurse started to say, finally off the phone. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Hacker. ICU door code is 8411*. Don't ask. I stood up, punched in the code, and the lock clicked open. I gave the nurse a small, apologetic smile. I need to secure the floor. Please get your staff into a safe room and stay there. Do not open this door for anyone but me or a uniformed officer you recognize. I slipped through the door, letting it swing shut and lock behind me. I was now in the main hospital corridor of the 4th floor. I had 17 minutes now, closer to 15, to turn this floor into a fortress. The schematics showed 3 points of ingress, 2 main elevator banks, and 1 emergency stairwell at the far end of the hall. My phone screen flickered, and one of the security feeds in the mosaic enlarged. It was the main entrance lobby. A man in a hospital security uniform was approaching the front desk. Hospital security supervisor, Tom Crenshaw, is on his way to you. Hacker's text read, Ex-Marine. Good man. I took the liberty of sending him an anonymous tip from a concerned federal source about a potential threat on the 4th floor. He'll be an asset. The Wolf may have had a team, but Hacker was an army of one. I met Crenshaw as he stepped out of the elevator. He was a big man, mid-50s, with a calm, authoritative presence. He saw me, and his eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively going to the radio on his belt. You the federal source? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Let's just say I'm the concerned party, I replied. We have an incoming threat. Unstable, armed ex-cop named Miller. He's 14 minutes out. His target is a patient in your ICU. Crenshaw didn't waste time questioning me. He saw the look in my eye, the urgency. My team is stretched thin. I have 3 guards for the whole campus tonight. What do you need? Elevators and stairs, I said, pointing down the hall. Shut them down. I need this floor isolated. Can you hold the elevators on the ground floor and post a man at the stairwell door? I can do that, he said, already speaking into his radio, his voice a rapid-fire string of commands and codes. I'll lock down the stairwell from the ground, no one up or down. He looked at me. That gives him one way up. The main elevator bank. Good, I said. Funneling his approach is half the battle. My phone buzzed. The red dot representing Miller's car had just exited the expressway. He was on the surface streets now. Closer. ETA, 9 minutes. I looked at the schematics again, my mind sorting through possibilities. Miller wouldn't just walk in the front door if he was smart. He'd look for a blind spot, a service entrance, a loading dock. Another text from Hacker. He's not stupid. He just turned off his cell phone. I've lost the signal. The map on my screen went blank. The red dot was gone. He was in the wind. He could be 9 minutes away, or he could be pulling into the parking garage across the street right now. The clock hadn't just sped up. It had shattered. He was here. The red dot vanished, and my carefully constructed timeline dissolved with it. He was close. Every shadow in the long, sterile corridor seemed to deepen. The hum of the ice machine down the hall sounded like a threat. Crenshaw, the security chief, looked at me, his face grim. He's dark. What's the play? He knows we'll be watching the front, I said, my mind racing. He'll try a side door. Loading dock, staff entrance. Hacker. I need eyes on the perimeter. Loading bays, parking garages, everything. Already on it. The text flashed back instantly. The mosaic of camera feeds on my phone shifted, displaying a dozen new angles of the hospital's exterior. You move. I'll watch. We split up, I told Crenshaw. You lock down this floor. I'll meet him in the lobby. I don't want him getting this far. I don't want him even breathing the same air as my mother. Alone? That's suicide, he argued. He's not looking for a security guard, I countered. He's looking for me. I'm the one who took everything from him. This is personal. Let me draw his fire. Just keep this floor secure. He hesitated, then nodded, a look of grudging respect in his eyes. Godspeed. He turned and headed for the elevators to implement the lockdown. I moved, not with the hurried panic of a civilian, but with the fluid purpose of a hunter. I took the back stairs, my footsteps silent on the concrete. I emerged on the ground floor near a service corridor. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and floor wax. I scanned the camera feeds on my phone as I moved. Nothing at the loading docks. Nothing in the main parking structure. Then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the feed from the emergency room entrance. A man in a dark hoodie and a baseball cap, head down, moving quickly through the automatic doors. He kept his face averted from the cameras, but the build, the gait. It was him. Miller. He was using the ER's chaos as cover. Smart. ER entrance. He's in. I texted Hacker. I see him. He's heading for the central elevator bank. Crenshaw's guys are there. He'll be intercepted. No, that was too simple. Miller wasn't an idiot. He knew there would be a reception. He was creating a diversion. My eyes darted around the hospital schematics on my phone, tracing his likely path. He wouldn't go for the main elevators. He'd peel off. Look for another way up. The service elevator. It was in a restricted hallway just off the main ER corridor. A staff-only access point. I broke into a run, my sneakers squeaking on the polished linoleum. I cut through a small cafeteria, ignoring the startled look from a late-night janitor. I burst into the main corridor just in time to see the stainless steel doors of the service elevator closing. I was too late. He was on his way up. I sprinted to the elevator, jamming my finger on the call button, but I knew it was useless. He was already ascending. My phone buzzed. A text from Crenshaw. Got him on camera, main elevators, he's not here. Wrong elevator, I typed back furiously. Service lift, heading up, he's bypassing you. I looked at the floor indicator above the elevator. It was climbing. Past 2, past 3. It stopped on 4. My floor, my mother's floor. Crenshaw's lockdown had failed. Miller had found a weak point. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, sickening dread washing over me. In my effort to create a choke point in the lobby, I had left the most critical area unguarded. I spun around, looking for another way up. The main stairs were too far. Then I saw it. Next to the service elevator was a small unmarked door, a maintenance closet on the schematics, but I also saw the small telltale sign of a fire extinguisher cabinet next to it. It wasn't just a closet. It was the fire escape stairwell. I wrenched the door open and plunged into the dark concrete shaft. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my lungs burning, my thighs screaming in protest. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my feet. I flew past the 2nd floor, the 3rd. As I reached the landing for the 4th floor, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A loud metallic bang from the hallway above, followed by a woman's sharp cry of alarm. The nurse. I burst through the stairwell door onto the 4th floor corridor. The scene was worse than I imagined. Miller was there, standing in front of the locked ICU doors. He had my mother's nurse by the arm, using her as a shield. In his other hand he held a revolver, its dark metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He had been trying to shoot the lock off the door. "Williams," he snarled when he saw me, his face a twisted mask of sweat and fury. "I knew you'd come. Let me in. Let me see the old bitch who ruined my life." The nurse was crying, her eyes wide with terror. "Let her go, Miller," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I held my hands up, open and empty, taking a slow step forward. "This is between you and me. She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this," he screamed, his voice cracking. He pressed the gun to the nurse's temple. "Open the door, or she dies right here." My mind was a supercomputer, running 1,000 scenarios. I couldn't rush him. He'd kill the nurse. I couldn't talk him down. He was too far gone. I needed a distraction, an opening, a fraction of a second. My eyes flickered past him, down the long corridor toward the main elevator bank. I saw Crenshaw and another guard step out, weapons drawn. Miller saw them too and laughed, a high, unhinged sound. My own welcoming committee. You think you can stop me? I've got nothing left to lose. He was right. That's what made him so dangerous. But as my eyes met Crenshaw's, I gave the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Stand down. My play. I took another step. You're right, Miller. You've lost everything. Your job, your pension, your reputation. But you shoot her, and you lose the last thing you have left. Your freedom. You'll die in a cage. I'm already in a cage, he roared. Then let her go, I said, my voice softening. And let's you and I finish this. No one else has to get hurt. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, the appeal to his shattered ego, the idea of a final one-on-one confrontation. He was considering it. That was my opening. My phone was still clutched in my left hand. With a flick of my thumb, I brought up the video of him sicking his dog on my mother. I turned the screen toward him and cranked the volume to max. The sound of my mother's agonized scream suddenly filled the silent hallway. It was a psychic blow. The audio was raw, brutal, and undeniable. For a split second, Miller's focus broke. His head snapped toward the phone, his grip on the nurse loosened by a single, critical inch. It was all I needed. I moved. I didn't close the distance. I used it. My right hand swept down and back, grabbing the heavy steel fire extinguisher off its wall mount. In one fluid, continuous motion, I swung it like a pendulum. It wasn't a wild heave. It was a precise, targeted strike aimed not at Miller, but at the wall beside him. The heavy cylinder struck the drywall with a deafening boom. The wall exploded inward in a shower of plaster dust and debris. The sudden, violent noise was a concussive blast in the enclosed space. It was a flashbang without the flash. Miller flinched hard, his gun hand wavering. The terrified nurse used that instant to wrench herself free, scrambling away down the hall. Miller was disoriented, his ears ringing, his eyes blinded by the dust. He raised his gun, trying to find me in the white haze. But I was no longer there. I had used the impact of the extinguisher to launch myself forward, low to the ground. I hit his knees with my shoulder, my entire body weight driving him backward. His balance shattered. He stumbled back, hitting the wall, the gun flying from his grasp and skittering across the linoleum. He never got a chance to recover. I was on him, a whirlwind of controlled violence, a strike to the throat to disrupt his breathing, a knee to the solar plexus to empty his lungs. As he gasped for air, collapsing to the floor, I twisted his arm behind his back in a restraining lock that sent a bolt of pure agony through his shoulder. He let out a choked, defeated sob. It was over. Crenshaw and his guards swarmed him, securing him in cuffs. The hallway was a chaotic mess of plaster dust, crying nurses, and barking radios. I stood back, breathing heavily, my heart still pounding like a drum. I looked at the steel door to the ICU. Behind it, my mother was safe. Later, as the sun began to rise, I sat by her bed. She was awake, groggy from the medication, but her eyes were clear. She looked at her bandaged arm, then at me. Did you handle it, Sarah?" she whispered. I took her good hand in mine. It felt small, but strong. The same hand that had tended roses and held me when I was a child. "Yes, Mom," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "I handled it. The roses are safe." Benjamin Carter ensured Miller was buried under a mountain of federal charges. The wolf, true to his nature, simply vanished, leaving behind a perfectly dismantled conspiracy and a multi-million-dollar civil settlement that would ensure my mother would want for nothing for the rest of her life. The Northwood Police Department was gutted by the scandal, but that was all just noise. The real victory was here, in this quiet room. It wasn't about the fight or the skills I'd learned in a dark and violent world. It was about what I had used them for. Not for a flag, not for a mission, but for her. For the scent of jasmine and damp earth. For my mother and her garden. I had come home from the war, only to find one last battle waiting for me on the front lawn. And for the first time, I had fought for a piece of the world I truly wanted to save.